I walked in on my husband having an affair with our neighbor, and now they're both acting like it was a one-time mistake. But I just discovered they've been together for months. I'm 31F, and my husband Tom, 34M, and I have been married for 7 years. We bought our first home together last year, excited to finally settle down in what seemed like the perfect neighborhood. Our next-door neighbors Becky, 29F, and her husband Kyle, 35M, quickly became friends. We'd have barbecues together, swap recipes, and sometimes even babysit each other's kids. I never suspected anything was going on until last Friday, when I came home early from work. The house was eerily quiet, which was strange since Tom usually worked from home on Fridays. I wandered upstairs, calling out his name, but he didn't answer. That's when I heard a sound from our bedroom, a muffled laugh, followed by a low, whispered voice. My heart raced as I pushed open the door, not prepared for what I saw. There, tangled in our bedsheets, were Tom and Becky, completely oblivious to my presence until I gasped. They scrambled apart, frantically grabbing at clothes, while I stood there, frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. Tom had the audacity to stammer, "It's not what it looks like," but I wasn't stupid. Becky quickly dressed and slipped past me, too ashamed or cowardly to look me in the eye. I felt my blood boiling, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and betrayal flooding over me. Tom, trying to regain his composure, started mumbling excuses. "It just happened once. I swear, it was a mistake." His words sounded pathetic, rehearsed. I stared at him, feeling like I didn't recognize the man I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade. I grabbed my things, my mind racing, and drove off to a friend's place, needing to escape the house that suddenly felt like a prison. Over the next couple of days, Tom bombarded me with messages, each one more desperate than the last. He kept claiming it was a one-time slip-up, that he hadn't been thinking clearly. He promised it meant nothing, that he still loved me. I ignored his calls, needing time to process, but I finally agreed to meet him for coffee on Sunday. I wanted answers, and I wanted to see his face as he tried to explain this mess. When we sat down, he looked remorseful, eyes red and tired. But his story didn't add up. Something felt off, and I wasn't buying it. I started pressing him, asking questions he clearly wasn't prepared for. He stumbled over his words, each answer weaker than the last. Finally, he admitted that he and Becky had been seeing each other for a few months. My stomach churned. He had lied to me again, and this time it felt even worse. "A few months?" I repeated, feeling a cold rage. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, disgusted. The betrayal cut even deeper now, knowing it wasn't a one-time thing. They had carried on behind my back for months, pretending like nothing was wrong. After leaving the cafe, I drove straight to Becky's house, my hands shaking on the wheel. Her husband, Kyle, answered the door, smiling, unaware of what had happened. I didn't hold back. I told him everything, from what I'd walked in on to Tom's confession about their months-long affair. His face twisted in disbelief, anger flashing in his eyes. He thanked me, his voice cold, and I watched as he stormed inside, slamming the door behind him. I didn't feel any satisfaction, just a hollow ache. My life had been ripped apart, and now theirs was too. That evening, I packed up some of my things and decided to stay with a friend for a while. I couldn't bear to sleep in the bed where Tom and Becky had betrayed me. The next morning, I found a text from Kyle. He wanted to meet to compare notes. Curiosity got the better of me, so we met at a nearby park. He revealed that Becky had been acting strangely for months, frequently disappearing without explanation. She had told him she was working late or out with friends. We shared stories, both of us piecing together how long they'd been deceiving us. As we talked, Kyle mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. He had recently installed a security camera in their living room, facing the backyard. He'd caught Becky sneaking out a few nights a week, heading over to my house. My blood ran cold as he offered to show me the footage. Watching those clips later that night, I saw her creeping into my home under the cover of darkness, meeting with Tom while I was out. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated series of betrayals, each one more twisted than the last. The next day, I decided to confront Tom again, armed with the new information. I showed him the footage, demanding to know how many nights they had spent together in our home. His face paled, and he finally broke down, admitting it had been going on for nearly 6 months. He and Becky had been meeting whenever I worked late, lying to their spouses without a second thought. "Why?" I asked, feeling both furious and heartbroken. He stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but nothing he said made sense. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. As the weeks passed, I continued to stay with my friend, avoiding any contact with Tom. He continued to reach out, his texts alternating between desperate apologies and angry accusations, blaming me for overreacting. But I wasn't about to let him twist this around on me. One evening, I decided to reach out to a divorce attorney, ready to end this sham of a marriage. I wanted out, and I wanted a clean break. The attorney explained the process, and I felt a strange sense of calm as I realized that soon, Tom would be nothing but a painful memory. One evening, Kyle called, saying he had kicked Becky out. He invited me over for a drink, and we spent the night commiserating over our ruined marriages. We talked about the plans we had once had, the future we'd dreamed of, and the betrayal we were now left to deal with. By the end of the night, we had both decided to go through with the divorce. It felt cathartic, finally making the decision to cut ties with the people who had hurt us. We promised to support each other through it, sharing updates and lending an ear when needed. But things took an unexpected turn. A week later, I received a message from Becky, of all people. She claimed she wanted to make things right. She apologized, saying she hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that she'd been caught up in the excitement of it all. She even asked if we could meet to clear the air. Against my better judgment, I agreed, mostly out of morbid curiosity. We met at a coffee shop, and I watched as she tried to rationalize her actions, blaming the boredom of suburban life and her lackluster marriage. I felt sick listening to her excuses. Midway through her explanation, she dropped a bombshell. She told me that Tom had been planning to leave me for her, that they had even discussed moving in together. "I thought you should know," she said, her tone almost smug. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Not only had they been sneaking around behind my back, but they had been plotting a future together, as if I was just an afterthought. I left the cafe feeling angrier than ever, more determined than ever to cut Tom out of my life for good. Fueled by rage, I went straight to Tom's office. I stormed in, demanding he meet me outside. He looked nervous as we stood on the sidewalk, clearly taken aback by my sudden appearance. I confronted him about Becky's claims, and he had the nerve to laugh it off, saying she had misinterpreted their conversations. He assured me that he had never planned to leave me, that she was just delusional. But his words sounded empty, hollow. I knew, deep down, that I couldn't trust anything he said. He was a liar, through and through. Determined to make a fresh start, I began dividing our assets and packing up my things from the house. Each item I boxed up felt like shedding a layer of pain. Meanwhile, Kyle and I kept in touch, supporting each other through the divorce proceedings. We'd share horror stories about our exes, finding solace in our shared experience. One evening, he mentioned that Becky was trying to reconcile with him, claiming she'd made a mistake. We laughed bitterly at the irony, both of us relieved to be moving on while our exes scrambled to salvage what was left. But just when I thought things were settling down, I received a call from my lawyer. He informed me that Tom was challenging the divorce terms, specifically regarding the house. I felt my anger flare up again. He had the audacity to fight me for the very place where he'd betrayed me. I met with a lawyer determined to fight back. I wouldn't let Tom take one more thing from me. This house was my home, my sanctuary, and I wasn't going to let him keep it. We filed a counterclaim, prepared to take this battle as far as needed. The legal proceedings dragged on for months, each meeting with the lawyers more exhausting than the last. Tom tried to portray himself as the victim, claiming he'd sacrificed so much for our marriage. I wanted to scream every time he spoke, but I kept my composure, letting my lawyer handle the lies. Eventually, we reached a settlement, and I was granted the house. The relief was overwhelming. I had won, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. The nightmare was finally ending, and I was free to rebuild my life on my terms. Once the dust settled, I threw a divorce party, inviting friends over to celebrate the new chapter of my life. We drank, laughed, and toasted to new beginnings. Kyle came too, sharing in the bittersweet celebration. We talked about the future, about how we both wanted to leave the neighborhood that had become tainted with painful memories. He mentioned he was considering a move out of state, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. We had been through so much together, and I realized how much his friendship had meant to me during this ordeal. A few weeks later, Kyle and I went out for dinner to discuss our next steps. He told me he had found a job opportunity in a different city, one that he was excited about. I congratulated him, feeling genuinely happy for him. But as we talked, I realized how much I would miss him. He had become my confidant, my rock during the most challenging months of my life. We promised to stay in touch, to visit each other, but I knew things would change. It was time for both of us to truly move forward, separately. On his last night in town, Kyle and I took a walk through the neighborhood, reminiscing about the good times before everything had fallen apart. We laughed, shared memories, and finally he hugged me tightly, thanking me for being there for him. "We survived this mess together," he said, smiling. As he drove away, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that we had both emerged stronger. The chapters with Tom and Becky were closed, and we were free to write our own stories. I walked back to the house, feeling more hopeful than I had in a long time. After Kyle left, I realized I was truly on my own. For the first time since discovering the affair, I faced the silence of the house by myself. It was both terrifying and liberating. I spent the next few weeks redecorating, purging everything that reminded me of Tom. But just when I thought I could finally put this all behind me, I received a message from a woman named Alice. She claimed to be Tom's ex-girlfriend from college, saying she'd recently found out he was married and felt I deserved to know something. My heart raced as I replied, eager to find out what else had been hidden. Alice and I spoke on the phone that evening, and what she revealed turned my stomach. She explained that Tom had contacted her out of the blue 6 months ago, claiming he wanted closure. They'd met up a few times, and he confided in her about his dissatisfaction with our marriage. She said he hinted at wanting to rekindle things with her, all while still sneaking around with Becky. I was floored. This man wasn't just a cheater, he was a serial liar, playing multiple women at once. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply he had betrayed me. Fueled by a renewed anger, I started digging through our shared bank accounts, looking for any other signs of deceit. Sure enough, I found charges for lavish dinners, hotel stays, and gifts I had never received. It was obvious these were expenses for his affairs. I documented everything, creating a timeline of his infidelities, one that stretched far beyond just Becky. I felt a cold determination. This wasn't just about ending a marriage anymore. It was about exposing him for who he truly was. I reached out to my attorney, sharing the new information, ready to escalate the divorce proceedings. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. I found messages on an old laptop of his, revealing flirtations with at least 2 other women. He'd been stringing them along too, crafting fake stories about his life, manipulating them just as he had manipulated me. Armed with this information, I confronted Tom one last time. I showed him the evidence, watched as his face fell, and told him he was nothing but a liar and a coward. He tried to plead, but I cut him off, telling him I was done listening to his pathetic excuses. I was determined to walk away, but not before making sure everyone knew the truth. As a final act of closure, I'd reached out to Becky. I wanted her to know the full extent of Tom's deceit, to make her understand she wasn't special, just another pawn in his game. We met up, and I laid it all out for her, showing her the messages, the transactions, the dates. She sat there, stunned, as she realized she had been played. She believed his lies, just as I had, and now she was left with nothing. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction watching her face fall. She had been part of my nightmare, and now she knew the truth. Becky was furious, but not at me, at Tom. She admitted that he had promised her the world, saying they'd start a life together, move away, and leave everything behind. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He had been telling each of us the same thing, spinning webs of lies with no intention of following through. I told her I didn't care what she did next, but I was done with both of them. She left, humiliated, and I felt an odd sense of closure. I had faced the people who had torn my life apart, and now I was ready to move forward. The next week, I finalized the divorce papers, and Tom signed them without protest. He looked defeated, like a man who had lost everything. But I felt nothing for him, no sympathy, no pity. He had brought this upon himself, and I was finally free from his lies. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a surge of relief. It was over. I was no longer tied to him, no longer weighed down by his deceit. I took a deep breath, stepping into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in months. My future was mine again, and I was ready to rebuild. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work, filling my days with projects that reignited my passion. I joined a hiking club, started taking yoga classes, and began reconnecting with old friends. I was rediscovering who I was, free from the shadow of Tom's betrayal. People noticed the change in me, commenting on how I seemed happier, more confident. And they were right. I had reclaimed my life, piecing together my own happiness. The scars remained, but they no longer defined me. I had found my strength again, and I was determined to keep moving forward. One afternoon, I bumped into Kyle at a local bookstore. He had moved back to town temporarily, he explained, staying with family as he sorted through the final stages of his own divorce. We went for coffee, catching up, and I was surprised by how easy it felt to be around him. We shared our stories, our struggles, and our plans for the future. There was a familiarity, a shared resilience that made me feel at ease. By the end of the afternoon, we'd exchanged numbers, promising to meet up again. It felt like a new beginning, unburdened by the past. Kyle and I began meeting regularly, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to talk. We supported each other, encouraged each other to pursue new passions, and shared laughter that had once felt impossible. We never talked about our exes, focusing instead on the present, on the lives we were rebuilding. Over time, I felt something shift, a warmth, a connection that felt genuine and real. I hadn't expected to find solace in him, but we had both been through the fire, and it had forged a bond between us. I was grateful for his friendship, and quietly, I wondered if it could become something more. One evening, after a long hike, Kyle and I sat on a hill overlooking the city, watching the sun set. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and the lessons we had learned from the past. He reached for my hand, and I felt a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. "We've come a long way," he said softly, squeezing my hand. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We had both been broken, but together we were healing. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope, to believe in the possibility of love again. Over the next few months, Kyle and I grew closer, taking things slow, savoring each moment. We had both been through too much to rush into anything, but there was a tenderness between us that felt comforting, natural. We spent weekends exploring new places, sharing meals, and building a foundation of trust. With him, I felt safe, respected, valued. The wounds from Tom's betrayal had left scars, but they no longer hurt. I was stronger now, more aware of what I deserved. And with Kyle, I was learning that love could be kind, honest, and deeply fulfilling. One day, I received a message from Becky. She apologized, saying she had gone to therapy and realized the pain she had caused. She wanted to make amends, to find forgiveness. I read her words, feeling a mixture of anger and indifference. I didn't need her apology. I had moved on. I deleted the message, choosing not to respond. My life was no longer entwined with hers or Tom's. I had found my own path, one that didn't include them. I had built a new life, one filled with honesty, resilience, and joy. I wasn't about to let the past drag me back. Kyle and I eventually decided to take a trip together, a week-long getaway to a cabin in the mountains. It was a chance to disconnect from everything, to enjoy each other's company without distractions. We hiked, cooked, and laughed, savoring each moment. One night, sitting by the fireplace, he told me he loved me. His words were simple, sincere, and I felt tears fill my eyes. For the first time in years, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I told him I loved him too, feeling a happiness I had once thought impossible. We returned from the trip feeling more connected than ever. We began to talk about the future, about the lives we wanted to build together. We had both been through heartbreak, betrayal, and pain, but it had only made us stronger. I was no longer the woman I had been with Tom. I was someone new, someone resilient, someone who had reclaimed her life. With Kyle, I felt like I could face anything, build anything, and find joy in each day. We had found each other in the ashes of our past, and together we were creating something beautiful. One afternoon, I received a letter from Tom. He apologized, saying he regretted everything and wished he could go back and undo the hurt. He asked for a second chance, claiming he had changed. I read the letter, feeling nothing but a quiet sense of finality. I tossed it in the trash, knowing that I had already closed that chapter. My life with him was over, and I was grateful for it. I had learned, I had grown, and I had moved on. I was free from his lies, free to live my life without his shadow hanging over me. Kyle and I decided to move in together, choosing a cozy apartment overlooking a lake. We decorated it with memories we had made, filling each room with warmth and laughter. Our days were simple but fulfilling, and I found joy in the little moments, cooking dinner together, watching movies on rainy nights, taking long walks by the water. I felt like I had finally found my home, a place where I was loved and valued. I had once been broken, but I had rebuilt myself, and now I was living a life that felt truly mine. Looking back, I realized that Tom's betrayal had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced me to confront my own strength, to rebuild my life from the ground up. I had faced heartbreak, humiliation, and anger, but I had come out the other side stronger. I had found love, joy, and a sense of purpose that I had never known before. My life with Kyle was simple, peaceful, and filled with a quiet happiness that I cherished every day. I was no longer haunted by the past. I had reclaimed my future, and I was living a life that was fully, beautifully mine. As the years passed, Kyle and I built a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and resilience. We faced challenges, celebrated victories, and grew together in ways I had never imagined. I was grateful for every lesson, every scar, and every moment of joy. I had once been defined by betrayal, but now I was defined by love, strength, and the unbreakable bond I shared with Kyle. Together, we continued to build a future that felt right, a future that was ours. I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, side by side. And so, my story came full circle, from heartbreak to healing, from betrayal to love. I had learned to trust again, to open my heart, and to believe in the beauty of second chances. I had faced my darkest fears and emerged stronger than ever. With Kyle by my side, I knew I had found a partner who would walk with me through whatever life brought our way. My life was no longer defined by the lies of the past. I had created a new chapter, one filled with hope, happiness, and a love that was real, honest, and everlasting.